So, hello also from our side. We are very happy to have you all here for the StahlstadtJS event. And we're also very happy to give a talk afterwards. But we will start with a short introduction, what we are doing here, what is our, I would say, context in the term of Siemens. And Markus will begin with the introduction about MindSphere.
Okay, so basically, when you hear of Siemens, the normal guys considering Siemens with things like fridges or gas turbines. But lately we began to develop software on a large scale. There's this project that is called MindSphere, that is basically an IoT cloud. In this project there are around about 1,200 employees, around about 700 developers. And here in Linz, we are currently responsible for all the UI applications.
So what are we doing in the context of UI applications? We're developing the core application, so every user that wants to use the MindSphere and want to access it, for instance, create a user, create some data in the MindSphere, needs to access these core applications. And we are also currently developing a design system in order to make all UIs in the MindSphere look consistent. And this will come also from our team here.
Yes.
I think this
that's basically it. If you have any questions, we can talk later about this.
Okay, then let's switch to our talk. So, as we already said, we are very happy to give you our talk about insights into state management, or in other terms, do it yourself, build your dream home. But first of all, we want to introduce ourselves here. So, who are the people who are talking to you for the next, I think, 30 to 40 minutes or something?
Ladies first.
Ladies first, okay. Hi, my name is Daniela. I'm the lead developer or a key developer for the UI applications we are developing here in Linz. I originally studied bioinformatics, some kind of other things that I'm doing now. I did my bachelor and master degree at the University of Applied Science Upper Austria at the campus Hagenberg. And I came to Siemens, I think about 1.5 years ago, started with web development then, never have done it before. And now I'm working on the MindSphere project.
Okay, hi, my name is Markus. I also studied at the University of Applied Sciences in Hagenberg, but it's I'm a little bit older than.
Yeah, a little bit, I would say.
So I'm basically into web development for around about nearly 20 years now. I started with basic stuff like websites and all this stuff, e-commerce stuff, and lately, or in the past years, switched more to application development. I'm responsible for architecture here at Linz site. Yeah.
So I think enough of us. Let's start with our talk.
Yeah.
So everyone in this room is, I think, a developer. And what do we want to build? We want to build application. It's like our daily business, regardless of which framework we're using, which tech stack underneath, we want to build applications. And we want to guide you through some ways how we are building our applications.
So when we start a project or we develop an idea or any kind of application, at the beginning we always have this kind of a clear idea of what we want to have and what we want to build. We have a simple requirement, it's totally clear on what we should focus, and we always have this, because the idea is small and simple, we have this kind of a solid foundation.
Yeah, and to visualize it to you and also to us, it's like a very simple cabin in the woods. We got a door where we can enter it, we can go inside if it's raining, we can open the window when the sun is shining, but we want to have it to fulfill all our requirements, as Markus stated. We want to have it on a solid foundation. We want to have it not blown away by the first wind that comes maybe in winter. We want to have it stable.
But as we all know, we are developers. We don't think of a simple house. We always think of the next big skyscraper, that one thing that everybody remembers.
We want to make it faster. Of course, we want to make it bigger. We want to make it better. And maybe then we want to develop the next groundbreaking app, like always the term states the next Facebook. We want to develop the next Facebook here.
So who is developing skyscrapers here? I'm always the one who always says, hey, I'm building the next big thing here. But
what comes out of it?
be honest, this is more the daily stuff that we are building, because as an vision evolves, what do we get? We get more requirements, we have limited budget, limited time, we have to stick something together really fast.
And we've got, like, I would say, feature blocks that are built on each other that are working. You can live in there, you can, at each block, look out of the window and see the landscape, but is it really that functional? Or do we want to build something like this?
It's always the thing, if we should step back one step from our application, we should have more focus and look at what we are really building. And it's even if you think, hey, this is cool, this is solid, it serves a purpose, but is it really this shiny, big skyscraper that we're talking about? I'm not so sure about that.
So we also find a comic that really reflects the, I would say, the aim of our talk. So what we got on the left-hand side, we begin with our application. We are beginning our development, so we've got a clean slate, we can build up a solid foundation, we can do anything we want. And at first we are always saying, we want to make it clear, we want to make it happen, we want to make it solid as we can. But then in the end, most of the time, something like this is the result.
So keep this picture in memory, because we'll reference it afterwards.
So now we talked about how to build applications, what most of the time happens to us developers. And now we want to talk about a little bit about the data flow. What is the data flow in our application?
So who is used to such diagrams? Data flow. Service A is communicating with service B and component A and component C, component D. So you have this kind of weird flow where everything happens magically. Nobody understands how and why and what, but basically it works.
And you have to be really in touch with the application to know what all the errors are doing there and what happens if maybe some service or any component in there changes the data. What happens to the other ones? Is the data like transferred to the right components, to the right views? Is it transferred at the right time? I cannot say through this diagram. But it's not a bad way. We would say it's the common way that an architecture is structured like that.
For me, in the past, all the applications that I have built was always this weird kind of stuff where these things happen magically. The communication is not a solid foundation, or there's no unique way of you do the communication or the data flow between the components. So we always struggle with these issues that the data is split up among different views.
It's updated at different places. Maybe some components do some updates which the other component wouldn't want to see or wouldn't want to have this update.
So we're always struggling with this kind of chaotic way of the data flowing through your application, and it really works, but it feels more like this. So
it works, but it's kind of chaotic.
There's no accident, everything works, yeah.
It's but like, I'm looking at it and thinking, okay, I hope that there is no accident or something like that.
But what is when an accident arrives? What's then?
Do you all really understand the architecture we've shown you before? Do you really know where your data is coming from? Do you know where it is directed to? Do you know where it's manipulated, deleted, or anything done to it?
So I'm honestly one of the older guys, and I'm not able to see the metrics or to read the metrics. I'm not the one who can easily debug all this weird data flow as we've seen it before. Daniela is more the guy who can do this. I cannot see.
He always uses his age as an excuse for that.
Yeah.
But I think
there is one thing for the older guys like me: always keep calm if there is any situation you can handle.
Because there is a solution for that. We can give you some...
Has anybody an idea what the solution could be? If you think back of our skyscraper for the data flow. Has anybody an idea what the data flow in a skyscraper is? Correct.
Yeah, nice.
So what does basically? In the construction site building, the architecture defines the data flow. How you transport people from the ground floor to the top floor. It's done via elevators.
And the elevator is here nothing else than a data flow concept. We want to transfer, in the skyscraper, for instance, people from one floor to another. It's like going up, going down. It's a data flow concept here.
So sure, you could use parachutes to come down again or something else, but essentially elevator is the key concept of data flow in the construction site building.
And there can be also other data flows, I assume, like you can also go by stairs to the next floor, or you can use
Escalators.
Yeah, or escalators, for instance.
So could we somehow use this concept for development?
Yes, of course, otherwise the talk would be useless. Yes, we can do this using state management. So, why is state management that important? There's another question for you, to the audience. What is state for you?
And one guy knows the answer, he's not allowed to
tell anything here.
Michael, you're not allowed. So has anybody an idea what a state is?
And there's no wrong answer, so just scream it out.
Is it just the representation of some kind of a database in the back end? Is it more? What is it? Any suggestions?
What can you save in your state? What would be some data that an application needs?
Nobody? Okay, we will relieve the answer.
Okay, we have somebody in our audience who has exactly the right answer. Michael held a talk about crafting solid state management, a principle-based architecture, and we found the perfect solution to our question in this talk. The answer is state can be anything for us.
So there is no guideline or whatever pattern where you say, okay, this is my state. It depends on the application, what the application does, and essentially what you have used to do.
So why is state management that important? As Markus already stated in the beginning, data can come from any source. It could be like caching data anywhere. Maybe some components have their own data. It can be web servers, it can be backend services, or anything. And that's a huge problem, and also that's also the point where state management is that important. We have to collect all this data, bring it somewhere together, and use it. And also data can come anytime. Think about updates or WebSockets. Then the data can arise anytime, and during development you do not know when the data will arrive, and you also do not know when you have to use it.
And all the time what has to be done, the content needs to be adjusted. All the views need to be updated somehow, need to be aligned, and that's really hard if you don't have a unique form of a data flow. This is all about basic, but we will enforce this topic more. It's all about architecture. And if you don't have a solid architecture, you build something like this that looks nice, but is not usable at all.
Yeah, and as you said before, you will not have any visitors over there, so that your data will not arrive at the top of this house, I would say. So why is it difficult? Because we are now motivating to use state management, but why is it that difficult that we have to talk about it? And also, why is it so difficult that not anybody is using it?
Again, we already mentioned that. In the modern web application, the data is shared all across your web app. There's no single point of view where only one data is shown and the other is another one. It's all shared. You have this common behavior that, for example, we often had the problem, or I had the problem in my beginning, that this magic behavior was that you had, for example, list view and the detail view, and you updated something in the detail view and it was not updated in the list view.
Or the other way around. I think I got the bug multiple times that I update my list view and the detail view stays the same, and I'm like, whoa, okay, I made somewhere a mistake, but I don't know where the mistake lies.
And this is only a simple problem, but if you're building large-scale application, this problem evolves and gets really big.
So data is also split across the app. You do not use any data at any place in the application. It won't be that all components use the same kind of data, also amount of data, or data at any time.
And the one thing that I already mentioned is that you have to focus on that, and you have to be really aware of when and what to update. This is the basic idea of a web application. You have to always be aware what is updated and when it is updated. And if you don't know that, you hardly will find, you will hardly solve any bug that you have.
Which brings us to the next point. Why is it often not used? During our research to this talk, we often came across the topic, it's so much boilerplate, it's such an overhead to introduce state management to my application. I do not want to do it because I have to add so many lines of codes that are not doing anything. Yeah, we disagree to that, because if you introduce a pattern like a state management pattern, you will have so many more advantages. You get to know your code, you know what your code is doing because you got a pattern below, and it's not like mixing up some lines of code anywhere in your application.
Yeah, and basically we are not even not here, not only in research. As we've mentioned, we work with really international teams. And this is a topic I'm hearing all the time, that it's so much boilerplate to work with state management. But is it really? I think, yeah, you have to write more code, that's for sure. But having a pattern is a uniform way of doing things, and then you can easily share it. If you do your stuff for your own, yeah, it's cool and it's okay, you do it like you want to. But if you have to spread that knowledge over multiple teams, then you have to have a unified way, and that's really important. And therefore, we have these patterns in software technology.
But an important part here is you have to get to know the pattern. It does not make any sense that you're just saying, yeah, I will use a state management pattern because it sounds like real fun, it's really cool. You have to get to know it, you have to know where are your advantages, maybe what are also your disadvantages. I think no state management pattern is like a universal concept for all our problems that we have during developing of applications. But you have to know what you are doing before you are introducing it, and also while implementation. Otherwise, you will get lost either way.
And this is really crucial. If you plan to use a pattern, then stick to it. Don't use it in some side project or side feature, and that's not good. When you use the pattern, really stick to it and enforce the use of the pattern. And be really, and I'm talking as the architect, be really harsh to your dev teams if they don't support this topic.
And he is all the time, I have to say. So another point here is be consistent. It's also relating to the point we said before, stick to the pattern, but also be consistent by sticking to the pattern. Of course, it is okay to adapt the pattern in a way that it fits your needs, but then you have to adapt it during all your development and all across your application. It does not make sense to adapt it for one specific case. You have to do it then for all your application stuff. Yeah, and sometimes it feels like you're reinventing the door here. So.
Okay, what is state management? So now we will briefly introduce you, for those who have not been into this topic, what state management is.
There is some general, I would say, concept is the flux pattern. I don't know how to spell it here in English. What's the common understanding of it? It's like you have one directional flow of the data in your application. So what does that mean? You can only change your data via using actions. So the only thing where you can change data and also your state is by dispatching actions. What does the dispatching do? It's like changing something in the store. The store will modify the state. So now you got the updated data also in your store. Then you can easily do mutations on the data without directly accessing the data. Because most of the time, directly accessing the data is the most crucial mistake, I would say, that a developer can do. Afterwards, when the state is updated, you can emit an event to fetch the new state, and the views are updated. And of course, the view can also update for instance, the store again, like if you think about a form where you want to persist something like a user or anything you want to send in the form data, of course the view can also dispatch actions to do this. But as you can see here, it's a one-directional flow.
And how does this flow look like? Think back to the skyscraper. For me, it's upside down, because I'm more the positive guy. But this essentially is an elevator.
And I mentioned it could also go down, so seems to work to both directions.
So this concept seems really easy, isn't it? It is easy.
So let's see, when it's so easy, how can we achieve it? And where can it be used at first? We talked about now the flux pattern, and yeah, general concept, yeah, sounds really good, but we want to use it. We do not have any advantage about general concepts that cannot be applied to our application. So the dataflow pattern we introduced to you is I would say developed in a lot of libraries. You can use it for Angular, for JavaScript, for React, for Vue, for all the libraries we already know, and also many more. And of course, you could also implement it by yourself. I think Markus already did that sometime, and he also mentioned it.
Before I came to this topic, I had implemented some kind of own state management because I was always struggling with these topics to update all the views corresponding to the data that I retrieved. And then I luckily found we here in Linz focus on Angular, and then I stumbled over NGRX, and I'm really happy with that. But basically, you can implement your state management yourself. It's not that big of a deal. As you have seen, the pattern is really, really simple.
And we know there are a lot of more libraries that you can use for your data flow concept. So this is not a complete picture here. You can use it, I would say, anywhere or build it for yourself. So it's like a concept you can use really in all your applications. As Markus mentioned, we are working with the NGRX concept. So you can see here like the application flow. It somehow looks like the Flux workflow, which is nice because it's based on it, but there are some differences.
There are only two changes here. You see this magic reducer bubble and the selectors bubble. Everything else is the same as the Flux pattern. So what is the reducer doing in the NGRX state store module? The reducer is capable or is the one thing that modifies the data in the store. And then NGRX has really the most powerful thing that I ever have seen in state management. This is the selector. What is a selector? Should I? Okay. A selector is basically
Sorry.
It's basically, I'm always saying, imagine the store is a client-side database. Then the selector is some kind of an SQL query on this database. And this is the magic inside NGRX, that you can query your store on however you want. But we will come to this topic later, because that's really the power inside of NGRX.
Absolutely, and for those who already worked with NGRX, there's, in my opinion, an essential part missing in this diagram. There are also the effects. What can you do with the effects is like, an effect is used to manipulate your data and send out the API request. So you want to update your data, maybe you want to send in a form data again, I stick to this example. The effect will like catch the action, do some backend request, and send out an action again, so that the reducer can catch the action and do the modification in the state. It's like another, I would say, loop here on the right-hand side. So now we introduced you to an exemplary concept, and in this topic we want to introduce you to some, I would say, lesson learned we already had, and we titled here State Management How. It should not be like you have to do it that way. We just want to share our experiences here. We want to share some struggles with you we had over the last 2 years.
Yeah, basically we're using NGRX for around about 2 years now, and we had many issues that we had learned, or also things that we covered or adopted, or things that we said for our use case we could make them better, and now we want to show you this insight that we have found for us.
But first of all,
yeah, again,
that's the architect topic.
Architect is always talking. NGRX is basically all about architecture. That's the basic statement, and you have to really more think about what you do than how and when you do it. It's really first always do a kind of a concept phase where you think about how you want to use your state, your store, and all these mechanics that NGRX or this Redux or Flux pattern provides you.
For us, the concept phase is like doing something like a solid foundation, and also set the requirements and also walls to make your restriction. What will you cover? What won't you cover in your application? In the context of state management, what does that mean? You should define what should be saved and how. So the state management thing is for me not only, I put all my data into it and then I'm safe, I can access it, I'm out of here. It's like, you should think about, do I really need to save it? Because otherwise it will be like a huge database where everything lies in it, but I'm not using it. And you have also to think about how you should save it. It does not make sense to like save, for instance, arrays of resources in an inconsistent way. You have to save it consistently, and then you will get all the advantages a state management has. Brings me to the next point. You should structure your state. If you're talking about clean code, we are always talking about how should you structure your application, what should the component look like, what should the service do, and stuff like that. And you should also consider this, of course, for your state. It's not, as I said, not only putting it in and, yeah, I've saved it, it's okay, I can access it. Either way, we have to structure it in a right way.
And then there's one topic I'm really aware of. You should always treat actions as applications events. And there's a really good slide that I found on NGConf last year. You can group basically actions into 3 categories. Those are user actions, backend actions, and device actions. And you should really focus on that you treat those actions again as events. When an application does something, then you react to something. Okay, then there's one thing that we already found out for ourselves. We built around the store, we built somehow a facade, so that the components that listen to the state are really decoupled from the state. So we right now are able to introduce any other kind of state management. We are not, don't have to rely on NGRX, we could use any other thing.
And there's also another advantage for the facade, if I may interrupt you. It's like you can encapsulate your properties. So the component will only access the data in your store through the facade. So you can give there also meaningful names to your properties so that you can later on know what you are doing in your component.
And then there's a consequence, and we'll cover this topic in depth more. You can really beat dumb components that are not aware that there is a store available.
And of course, always be consistent in your state. I told you that already. And for us, we made also the experience. Clean code is not only for your really application code or component code or service code, it's also for the state management. You have to build up here a really nice code. You have to be really aware of the naming, otherwise you will be lost. As for instance, the selectors are such a powerful tool. I think we got applications or modules where we've got about 20 selectors or something like that. And if those selectors do not have a meaningful name here, you won't use it anymore, and you will write another one, and then you got some crowded file where you cannot find anything anymore.
Also, if you think of your actions again, if you have seen the slide before, give them meaningful names. Also cluster them to modules or something, so that you, in the end, when you debug your code, your application, you know what is happening.
And also type it. For the actions, for instance, you got a type and a payload. And the payload is most of the time like an object you've got an interface for. So type your payload here. It will help you also for the debugging stuff and also for your clean codiness, I would say.
Okay. So, then that's the more interesting part. We go into the implementation. So I'm out of here because I'm the architect.
He's not out of here. So, but we are now coming to the thing we all want to do. We want to implement such things because it sounds really interesting. It sounds really cool to have such concepts in your application. And now we want to talk to you about how we can achieve these things. First of all, during the last 2 years, we came across a lot of reducers that were like a long, long file with a lot of logic in the reducer. What should the reducer do? The reducer reacts to actions and saves the updated data to the store. And we made, I think both of us made the mistakes that we added in the reducer some logic to somehow manipulate the payload of the action before saving it to the state. Yeah, we could do that, but we shouldn't do it. Why shouldn't we do it? Think about debugging later on, or think about testing those stuff. It's really hard, and this shouldn't be part of the reducers.
Absolutely.
That's what he's always talking to me here in the office. He said, do not put logic in the reducer. Do use a selector for that. Yeah.
Then we always had this issue, a reducer is basically a pure function which has a switch case statement inside, where you listen to your actions that are incoming and then you do the modification of your state. And many times I get this question, okay, I could also do this with an if statement. Yeah, that's nice, but the pattern is more use a case switch so that you basically can afterwards group multiple actions together and do the same transformation on the reducer.
And also our code quality tool is saying, yeah, there's a switch statement with only one case. You should remove it and replace it with an if condition.
But
yeah,
don't do that.
Don't do that because it's a reducer. It's the meaning of the reducer to have the switch statement in there because you will extend your reducer, you will add some more actions, then it will be irrelevant what the code quality tool is saying, and you will be really happy to have the switch statement in the beginning. As we stated before, you have to be consistent in using your pattern. And when you are not consistent in using like these statements in the reducers, you are not consistent anymore.
And you could wonder where you could use multiple actions that do the same stuff. Simple example, you have some kind of a loading screen where you show that something is loading, and you could listen to this loading screen on multiple actions.
You can group them then with the switch. Yeah.
Okay, and then there is a topic that Michael and Daniela had a lot of discussion on, because in Angular you have basically one way to load data. I don't know who works with Angular. Is everybody known to the concept of a resolver in Angular? Okay, a resolver is basically a service that loads data via an HTTP request. And what the resolver does, it returns the loaded value to the route. So basically the value is stored inside the route then. But when we use NGRX or state management, we basically don't want that because we don't want components that listen to routes or something else. They only should retrieve the data from the store, from nothing where else. And so we return our resolvers every time null because we are not putting in anything inside the route. What we do, we call the resolver and then put the data into the store.
And the component will only build up if all the data is there. And that's for us the advantage, as we do not want to have the component like loading blah, 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 beside each other, I would say. We want to have it loaded when all the data is there. And therefore we were using the resolvers here. Yeah,
but there is currently, for state management, there is no really way to go to load data for me, because the resolver kind of feels wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, we have talked about it already. We are using effects only for put, post, or delete API requests. Sometimes we have to do also get requests via effects, but we are not really happy about that. We are using it to catch an action, do the request, send out another action to the store, and save the manipulated data here. Why do we do that in an effect? Is also somehow related to the next point here, catch your errors. We catch our errors at 2 points in our applications. The one thing Markus mentioned, the resolvers, because there are the API requests, and also in the effects, of course. And what's the really nice advantage is here, you can react with situation-specific actions to it. If you would catch it in a data service directly, you can say, okay, there was an error. But if we do it, for instance, in an effect that is saving some form data to the backend service, you can react because you know, okay, my saving to this backend service with this payload and this endpoint was going wrong.
And again, state management is all about communication inside your app. So you can really react here on errors. And not just catch them, react them, and show something in the UI, for example.
And it brings us also to the last point on this slide. Everything is testable. We both made the mistake in the beginning that we introduced NGRX as a state management concept, and we did not test anything. I'm not allowed to say it out really loud here, but we missed a lot of unit test cases here. And the nice thing about NGRX is that you can really test each single part of it. And yeah, I think we read some articles where it was stated, for instance, actions. You do not have to test it. It's like an object that is sent out and received somewhere. We are currently testing actions also. If you think about the payload that is sent out with the actions, you are typing them, you can also test them.
Absolutely. I have nothing to add here.
So, implementation 2.
Okay, this is, by the way, a picture of us when we discuss about namings and structures in our code.
I'm the one on the top, I would say. I'm the laughing one.
Okay, I already mentioned this topic. What we really do, we enforce the development of dumb components. So component basically, from my point of view, should just get data and present this data. There shouldn't be any router logic inside, as we already mentioned. There should no data manipulation and essentially no business logic. Every time I see business logic in a component, I get really mad, and all the guys that work with me know that.
And with no router logic, we mean here a simple router navigate is completely fine, but a component should not care about resolving like query parameters of a route, or like what is my selected resource that I want to have here. Router navigate completely fine, but do not add some logic to a component that should be in a resolver and also saved already in the store when the component is built up.
And when you do that, your life gets much easier because your tests are easier to write and your components are really dumb and they basically just present data.
We also introduced a concept which works for us from wrapper components. What does that mean? Often you need data from your store in your component directly. All the data that comes from the store is unobservable, so you have to somehow get to the value. You have to subscribe or something like that. So we introduced wrapper components that do the thing for us by using the async pipe and putting the data, the resolved data, via an input parameter to the child component. And using this way, we can avoid subscriptions, and we do have all the advantages of the async pipe.
And for us, manually subscribing to an observable, I think it's not a good way if you do that. If you do that in your code, in some circumstances, it's fine. But when you do that on a regular basis, from my point of view, you're doing something wrong.
And do you remember we had so many bugs where we subscribed in many components, and at some point the data is changed? Then all your subscriptions will rise and say, okay, yeah, I will do my logic inside the subscription again. And yeah, there you can spend so much time to search for your bug.
Okay, and then as I already mentioned, I will want to point out one topic that is really, I'm always saying that only a few people in my mind really grasp what a selector is capable of. So I really want to focus on this topic now. Here we have a little example for those people who are not aware what a selector does. Imagine you have your store where you store your orders, and you have three kind of states. You have all your orders, you have the current orders, and you have the past orders. You could now do for all these three items a separate state. But is this really what you want? Because basically you have the all orders, and if you do a selection, a subset of that, you have the past orders and the current orders. So this is basically one state and three selectors to retrieve all the data.
And the component, as stated below on the slide, can select which selector do I want to use. Do I want to have the current orders, the past orders, or maybe I want a list of all my orders? And we can choose that via using different selectors here.
And this is also one thing that I'm always mentioning to Daniela if she asks me something or did it in the past.
It's like always I'm asking him, hey, Markus, I got the problem. Have you got any idea how could I solve it? And he has an answer every time for it. Have you thought about a selector? Please use a selector. And it's like, he's absolutely right about it. But most of the time, I think all of us who are working with NGRX are forgetting about the power that the selectors do have. And we have to think about it more, because I think the strength of our NGRX applications are the selectors and nothing else.
Absolutely. So what can a selector do for you? A selector is capable of a lot of things. It's not about only retrieving a subset. You could also merge things together. So that's really important. You also could transform data. So we do that a lot. We transform data in a way that the view has only to compose it. Imagine that you have multiple HTTP requests where you get informations from different endpoints, and then you have to somehow merge it together. We do that via a selector, and the view gets the data in the way that it needs. So there is no business logic, no parser or transform service or something like that. We do this all in the selector.
And what's also really nice about that is that you could test it. You could test your selectors really good. But you have to keep in mind, you should not put all your logic you got in the selector. Think also about using utility functions maybe over there. If you do some sorting, you want to sort an array by a given property, for instance, please remove this to the util function that you can also test separately. Another thing we want to point out is implement fine-grained selectors. What does that mean? If you, for instance, think about a state with 3 properties. For me, there should be at least 3 selectors because I want to have a selector for each property that is in my state.
You heard it, at least.
Yeah.
And in a good project, from my point of view, there are always more selectors than properties you have want to retrieve.
Absolutely. And you should also make use of feature selectors. That is a really great part if you're also developing your application in feature modules. Then you can give, I won't go into deep with the feature modules, but you can give some block of your state a name, and you can access this block of your state by just creating a selector with a given name. And that's also a really powerful tool here.
Always don't be afraid to build selectors that you think you might not use, because the essential thing is also that you can combine them together. That's really a powerful tool.
And speaking about feature modules, it's also okay to use selectors across the feature modules. Maybe you need some data from the one feature module in the other one, and you should not implement a selector again. Reuse it and combine those.
So again, really be smart and use the power of selector. Also, we have stated the link of there's a really good talk on the engineering conf of the power of selector. Look at that. There's really so much inside the selectors.
So now we got our application running. That's cool. We went through all the building stuff. We did our unit tests. We made it through the check of our project lead, and now there's a bug. What do we do when we are working with NGRX?
So basically, what's the real big benefit, and that was really mind-blowing for me as I have seen it in the first time. There is this kind of tool where you can look into the application. You see all actions and states are logged. You can time travel through them, so you can basically repeat all the steps that have led to a common bug or something, and you're always aware what your application is doing at what state.
And you can also easily find the bad state, as you can go through your state, check, okay, at this time it's okay, okay, here's the mistake. And then you can check the action, which occurs before the bad state, and you could also check the payload, because if the payload is correct, then you will most probably have somewhere else your bug. And what Markus already stated is you have to check the diff in the state. What does that mean? You can check also in the dev tools, we will talk later on about that, the difference in your states in between 2 actions, for instance. So you can see what an action does to the state and how does it look like after the action is, I would say, used in the state.
Yeah. And I'm personally, as I told you, doing web development since around about 20 years now, and I'm really coming from the dark ages where you had really to do a lot of console log and something like that to really understand what the app is doing. And if you have done that, it was always kind of debugging. Where's the error? Where is it happening? And with that, this is gone. You really are so much faster to understand what your app is doing and why it is doing.
And you can easily drag it down. That's the last point here. If you got, the action is okay, but the state after the action is wrong, then we know that there's something wrong with the reducer, with the data handling of the updated data. Something goes wrong there. And if the action payload looks good, then we have to check the component or maybe the steps in the util functions, but we know where to search for our bug, and that's a big advantage of this concept. So there's more Of course.
Yeah. Besides NGRX, there are more tools that you could use. There's, for example, NGRX Entity. With that, you can easily handle collections inside your state. There are predefined methods and functions that you can use so that you don't have to do much boilerplate here.
Especially in the reducers, as you think about adding some resource to an array, you will always add the same line of codes on and on again in your reducer, and that's what NGRX Entity is encapsulating for you. There's also the router store. What is the router store about? It's like adding a state module for the router in your state, and you do not have to do anything. In this state, it is saved where you are in your routing, in your application, what are the query parameters, also the history of the routes, I think. So it's really a good package to use when you struggle a lot considering routing and you need to know in your application where do I stand.
Okay, then we have the store dev tools. I would highly recommend this if you are using NGRX, because this is a really nice way to debug your app. So this time traveling and all, it's all, if you're using this store dev tools, then there's also a Chrome plugin that you could use for your console, and then you have all the things available for you. And last but not least, there's NGRX Store Freeze. This is also a really powerful module. This prevents you to do manipulation outside of the reducer, which is really important. Because somehow, some devs always try to manipulate data outside of this data flow concept.
And of course, there are many more we haven't mentioned here. We are well aware that there are many packages in development. There's a lot of stuff ongoing also in the NGRX community. There are a lot of patterns that try to, I would say, avoid disadvantages that come with NGRX. So get to know with the stuff, check the modules that are there. I think there are a lot of libraries that can help you here.
So basically, state management. Yeah,
check.
Just go for it. And there's one really quote I found that I really like. It's talking about Redux, and Redux is a state management library for React. So basically,
it's stating Redux is not great for making simple things quickly. It is great for making really hard things simple. And I think that's exactly the message we want to give you with our talk here. So
last but not least, go for it. Don't dream it and build your skyscraper, your shiny thing. But
of course, with the elevator stuff, using state management. So thanks for your attention. We got some minor point at the end, but a very important one. Hopefully you're curious now. We are hiring. You can find here some links. And we got also flyers on the tables. So give it a quick look. And if you got interested, please don't hesitate to come to us, talk to us, grab a beer, and yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Daniela and Markus. I'd say we have a small break, grab some refreshments, wire up Michael, and then let's continue. And if you have any questions to Michael and Markus, and Daniela, you'll find them in the breaks and afterwards when there's food. So let's continue in about 5 to 10 minutes. Bye-bye.